Resident Evil 3 was developed by Capcom and published by the same company. This is the sequel to the Resident Evil 2 remake, which came out last year in 2019, and this game serves as a remake to Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, which came out back in the late 1990s. The game follows a more familiar structure that was established with Resident Evil 2, as the game closely resembles the format of its predecessor, more so than being an actual beat-for-beat remake of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. And in many ways, that is actually one of the things that I found to be disappointing about this game. As a whole, the game plays very well. The shooting mechanics are on point, and the game pretty much plays the same as Resident Evil 2. But when you look at the package as a whole and you look at what Capcom could have done with this remake, there's a lot of missed opportunities here. For anyone who did play the original Resident Evil 3, I understand that it would be hard for those people to overlook what was omitted with this newer reimagined version of a classic. And so multiple areas were cut out of this game, including the park, the clock tower, and the underground facility, which was altered. It's in the game, but it's been changed from the original version. I believe it's called the Dead Factory. That was in the original game. In this game, it's more of a science lab. But these are some examples of, certain things that were either omitted completely or just changed. And it really doesn't seem that Capcom had good enough reasons to alter what was in the original game for this updated version. The game just comes off as being kind of, I guess the word for it would be rushed. After all, this game, it was announced out of nowhere just a few months ago. Not even 4 months ago did anyone know that this game was even in existence. And this was coming off of all the unanimous praise that Capcom got for their work on the Resident Evil 2 remake, which garnered multiple Game of the Year awards. And so when you look at the things that were omitted from the original version, and it's not just levels either, it's also various enemies that were cut from the game, such as the giant spiders. I guess the Drain demos, the updated version of that enemy type, kind of makes up for that. Yeah, those enemies were omitted because the clock tower level was omitted from the game. And some of these things could have been shifted around, which would have made the game longer. But Capcom didn't go that direction, and I'm not really sure as to why they decided not to. Another big problem with Resident Evil 3 is Nemesis himself. He's really been shafted in this game, and he serves more as a scripted set piece enemy encounter. He doesn't really stalk you as much as Tyrant did, Mr. X did back in the Resident Evil 2 remake. And that's because the little hub area that is the streets of Raccoon City that you start off with in the game, that particular area isn't very, it's not very long, it's actually pretty short. And that's another big problem with the game as well. The fact that you have multiple areas in the game that just, they don't stick for very long. And you really don't stay in one specific area for too long. Some of the levels in the game last maybe anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes tops, depending on your skill level and depending on what difficulty you're playing on. As far as any new elements that were incorporated, there's not much that's actually new here compared to Resident Evil 2. They did add in a dodge mechanic, which is similar. The way it's designed in this game, it's similar to the time freeze dodge mechanic that's found in the Bayonetta games, where you'll dodge an attack and then the game will give you a bit of a slowdown to be able to dish out more damage to whatever it is you're facing on screen. And that's cool and all, but the dodge mechanic is actually very tricky to use. It only works just before an enemy strikes you. you have to wait for an enemy to start up their attack animation in order for it to work. And so it's pretty unreliable. There is an item that you can unlock in the rewards menu that'll make the dodging mechanic easier. Although I haven't actually unlocked that item, so I can't really speak as to, if it actually makes that mechanic more bearable. And in regards to overall content, I'm actually really surprised at how bare bones this game is, because Resident Evil 2 had 2 playable characters, 2 separate campaigns for both Claire and Leon, and then you had 2 different scenarios, scenario A and then scenario B, which would shift certain events of the game around, shift certain items as to when you acquire certain things in the game. And that added to the replayability. But Resident Evil 2 also had these narrative-driven, I guess, survival challenges. And the game initially launched with the one where you play as Hunk, who is one of the, I guess, the operatives or whatever that's sent out during the pandemic that takes place in Raccoon City. And nothing like that is here in Resident Evil 3, and it's unclear if Capcom's going to release content that matches what they did with Resident Evil 2. And if they don't, that just hurts the game as far as replayability. Capcom's intention for replayability with this game was to include Resident Evil Resistance, which is a separate game within of itself, and they just bundled that game in for free, probably due to the fact that the game received negative attention, negative feedback since they unveiled the initial trailer for that. And that's primarily because players don't really play Resident Evil for the multiplayer. It's primarily a single player franchise, and no one's really interested in playing a multiplayer centric Resident Evil game. And I did play one match of Resident Evil Resistance on the survivor side, and it's pretty mediocre. It's something that heavily involves cooperative play with your team, and it's one of those things where if you're playing with shitty players, people who don't want to cooperate and just don't want to learn how the game works, you're not going to have a good time. And so as a whole, overall, when you look at all the game's flaws and what actually went wrong, or what wasn't done as well, or what should have been improved, this game it's a disappointment. Clearly, this needed more development time. I don't believe the same team that worked on Resident Evil 2 worked on this. I'm not sure if the game, like the development on the game, was outsourced to a different company, or if Capcom had gotten a different team internally to develop this game. I'm not sure exactly which one it is, but either way, this could have been a lot better than what it turned out to be. And unfortunately, this does not come close to the same level of quality as Resident Evil 2. Now, that's not to say that the game is bad. The game is good. It's a good game. It's a good Resident Evil game, but it's one of the weaker entries in the series. And the remake had the chance to elevate Resident Evil 3 to where, it's just as good as Resident Evil 2 or Resident Evil 4, some of the best games in the series. And unfortunately, because of the way Capcom handled the development with this game and certain decisions that were made during the development process, unfortunately, it's pretty much a one and done type of game. And that's not something I was expecting. I was expecting something that had more replay value, and this game really doesn't have it. It just doesn't have it. It's not there, and I'm not sure why they thought it was a good idea to release the game this way, in this state. There should have been more content added, and if we get anything as far as post-launch content with this game, I don't think it's going to justify the price of $60. And so that's what I got to say about the Resident Evil 3 remake. Capcom's been on an uphill victory streak, and this game, I guess, kind of ruined that. So it is what it is.